My name is Jonah, and welcome to Life Matters, where we talk about life matters because life matters. Haven't been using my intro recently, so I got to start using that again. Today, I want to talk to you about the case of the life of the mother. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I've noticed that it is more frequently arising throughout the course of conversations about abortion. I'm pro-life, and so we're going to go ahead and dive into the case of the life of the mother and understanding all of the nuances because it can be a complex topic. But my goal is to simplify it and equip you with simple and effective ways to talk about this topic with any person. So here we go. Before I dive into the case of the life of the mother, I would like to define a few terms. So the term abortion can mean a few different things. In the medical community, there's often a differentiation between an induced abortion and a spontaneous abortion. A spontaneous abortion is a miscarriage. Now, even in the UK, from what I understand from my reading, I understand that the term miscarriage is actually now used instead of spontaneous abortion out of sensitivity to the mother because this is obviously a different action than an induced abortion. An induced abortion is an elective abortion. It is something that is chosen, and it is the intentional killing of an unborn child by direct means. Now, this is obviously very different than a miscarriage. So when I use the term abortion today, I'm going to be using it to mean the intentional killing of an unborn child by direct means. So let's go ahead and jump into the case of the life of the mother. And I would like to say that obviously the unborn child is always innocent, and we're going to dive more into that later in this video. So I guess when I have pro-life conversations, I always bring up two things. I always bring the conversation back to two things. This is sort of, I guess you could say, the substance of my beliefs and what the conversation needs to be about, and that's twofold. One, human beings have dignity, intrinsic worth, and value. Two, murder is always wrong. My conversations always need to bring those two things into the picture, and my conversation actually needs to be about those two things. And so I encourage you, whenever you're having a conversation, to direct the conversation towards those two truths because that's the heart of our beliefs. Now, when it comes to talking about the case of the life of the mother, there are two things that I bring up, and those two things are a little bit different, but there are similarities. And so I have notes, forgive me, I'm going to be looking down a little bit here, but the two things that I like to bring up when talking about the case of the life of the mother is one, it is always wrong to murder, which is to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Two, we should give women the care necessary for their recovery. This is obvious. But the one thing that's off the table is murdering one party to save the other. This is always wrong. This would be a form of human sacrifice. And so I do not believe in the pro-life position. The truth, reality, is that it is never okay to intentionally kill an innocent human being, even if killing that child may prevent somebody else from dying. So let's go ahead and really now jump into the case of the life of the mother. So we need to understand the principle of double effect. And as I run through the principle of double effect here, I am going to be addressing, say, a case of the life of the mother. The case of the life of the mother is essentially an argument from the pro-abortion side, which says, well, if the mother's life is in danger and the child is likely or certainly going to die, I mean, there have been babies that, survive really hard circumstances, but let's hypothetically propose that the baby will certainly die, that they would argue it's always better to save more lives than no lives. And so if the baby's going to die either way, we can murder the child in pursuit of saving the mother's life. That's essentially the case of the life of the mother. And so now let's go ahead and jump into the principle of double effect and really analyze the case of the life of the mother with that in mind. So the principle of double effect, I will be utilizing language from Catholic Answers and Father Tad Pachelosik. I think that's how you say it. He's a Catholic bioethicist. And so, yeah, credit to them. One, the first principle of the principle of double effect, there are 4 principles. The first is the action done must be morally good or neutral. So if murder of innocent people is always wrong, then that's intrinsically bad. So the action could never be murdering an innocent child. That would be wrong. Now, there are ways to help the mother, obviously, by giving her medicine, maybe giving her surgery, and these things are morally neutral, or even you could make a really, really good case that many of these actions are morally good. For example, if a woman had cancer in her womb, she would be able to remove her womb in order to, save her life. Obviously, we don't want her to lose her womb, but if she is sick and that sickness is located within her womb and it is going to gravely harm her, then we would all say that it's morally good to remove her womb in order to save her life. Right? So that would be an example of an action that would be morally neutral or even morally good. 2, the bad effect, which is the loss of the child, cannot be the means by which the good effect, which is saving the life of the mother, is achieved. So within every action, I'm going to dive into this a little later, there is an intention, there's an object of the action, and then there's circumstances. If an action is intrinsically wrong in and of itself, like I said in point 1, then that action cannot be pursued. We would say the bad effect, which is the loss of the child, cannot be the means, meaning if we have to kill a child in order to save the life of the mother, then that would be off the table. So the bad effect, which is the loss of the child, cannot be the means, which is the literal action taken by which the good effect is achieved. So that's the second point. The third point here is the good effect must be intended, so which is saving the life of the mother. While the bad effect, if the child were to be harmed or die throughout the course of action taken to save the life of the mother, can never be intended and must be avoided, if possible. So, and then fourth, lastly, the good effect, which is saving the life of the mother, must be at least equal to the bad effect, which is if the child were harmed or lost throughout the course of saving the life of the mother. So, 1, it's off the table to do an evil action. The action must be morally good or neutral. 2, the bad effect, which is the loss of the child, cannot be the means by which the mother's life is saved. 3, the good effect, which is saving the life of the mother, while must never be, 3, the good effect must be intended, which is saving the life of the mother, while the bad effect, which is the death of the child or the harm of the child, must never be willed or intended and must be avoided if possible. And lastly, 4, the good effect, which is saving the life of the mother, must be at least equal to the bad effect, which would be the loss of the child. To further illuminate that point, we could speak of a case where a mother had, say, stage 4 cancer in the womb. She could morally undergo treatment for her cancer even though the treatment may harm her child. Does that make sense? So if she were to get like chemotherapy or something like that, even though it may harm her child, the action is directed towards the cancer. Now, if the mother did not have a serious ailment and she used medicine that would gravely harm the child, then that may not be proportionate. It may not be justified because if the mother's life is not in grave danger, then you cannot do something which may indirectly bring grave harm to the child. So that's what point 4 is talking about. So in the case of the life of the mother, there's usually 3 options really. 1, do nothing. 2, do something, but it doesn't directly attack the child. And 3, directly attack the child in order to save the mother's life. So there's really 3 options there. I'll repeat them. Do nothing, do something, but make sure that action doesn't directly attack the child. And 3, directly attack the child to save the mother's life. So those are usually the 3 options. Unfortunately, in our day and age, the medical field has sort of dehumanized the unborn child and now jumps to saving the mother's life in all of these cases. Now, there are good doctors out there who would avoid attacking the child in order to save the mother's life, and they must be commended. So we must consider in every action 3 things. Every action is, I guess, comprised of 3 things. 1, the object of the act. 2, the end in view, what is being sought, which this is the intention of an act. And 3, the circumstances surrounding the action. So we have the object of the act, the intention of the act, and the circumstances surrounding the act. Now, like I said earlier, certain actions are gravely immoral in and of themselves. They're gravely evil in and of themselves. So essentially, the action itself, I guess you could, well, the action doesn't really have, it has matter. So like, for example, stabbing an innocent person is always gravely immoral because you're using violence against somebody who does not deserve it. And so this means that the whole action itself would be evil. There's no intent. Intent can never change the object of an action. Now, there are some people out there who might make the argument that if an intention is good, then this sort of justifies an action. So they'll say, well, we intend on saving the life of the mother, and so since we're intending on saving the life of the mother, we can take direct action against the child because our intention is towards saving the life of the mother. This would be the end. Well, actually, really what's happening there, first off, the object, which is attacking the child directly, is intrinsically morally evil. So there you go, that the whole action, it collapses there because it's just wrong. It's always wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings or attack innocent human beings. The intention can't change that fact. It can't change the fact of the action in that sense, the object. Now, we could even, I think a case could even be made that, say your intention is set up towards saving the life of the mother, and the object is the means by which you are achieving this end, which would be killing the child. We could even argue that the intention there is actually sort of wedded to the object there. You could, in your head, think, oh, I am doing this for a certain end. But really, when you pursue attacking an innocent child, your intention was always to attack that innocent child. It was just your intention was always ordered towards attacking an innocent child in order to save the life of the mother. And there it becomes very clear how this is a form of human sacrifice, because the action itself is sacrificing a human for another human. Hopefully that makes sense there. So just wanted to be clear. The intention cannot change the nature of the action if the action itself is intrinsically morally evil. I know I already touched on this a bit, but it's worth clarifying further. It must always be understood that a human being is an end and never a means. if we reduce a person to the means to an end, then we dehumanize that person and we make them an object, which human beings are actually an end in and of themselves. They always need to be an end in and of themselves. And so this is sort of the concept of utilitarianism, which is, there's a maximum amount of good for the most amount of people that could be pursued. And yeah, maybe it might mean that certain people don't make the cut, or they kind of have to be sacrificed in order for the greater good of this large number of people. That's a really corrupt view because it dehumanizes the people on the outskirts, usually the most weak, the most innocent, and the ones who cannot fend for themselves. And so in this way, utilitarianism does not keep the common good in view, because the common good involves all people. Rather, utilitarianism fakes having the common good in view, when in reality it only has the good of a majority of people in view. We can't forget about the most innocent, the most poor, the most marginalized. They should never be sacrificed in that way. Now that all of this is clarified, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the most common treatments, you could say, or common actions that are taken to save the life of the mother. So let's talk about the really common case of the ectopic pregnancy, which is when the child is not located in the proper place. And in this case, I'm going to talk about a fallopian ectopic pregnancy, in which case the child is attached in the fallopian tube, and that's where they're growing. So I want to quote this quote from Kathy Schiffer at the National Catholic Register. I found this quote very good. This is the quote, quote, "It is not permissible, however, to initiate or recommend treatments that have as their purpose or direct effect the removal, destruction, or interference with implantation of a fertilized ovum." This, I think, and unquote, this, I think, really, really captures the pro-life stance. So let's go ahead and take a look at those treatments. 1, salpingectomy. A salpingectomy is basically universally acceptable. First treatment is a salpingectomy. A salpingectomy is basically universally acceptable under the principle of the double effect. This is when the child is in the fallopian tube, and the fallopian tube, a portion of it, is cut out and surgically and then removed, and then things are repaired within the fallopian tube there to save the life of the mother. And so you have this pathology that has arisen. There is a danger to the mother's life by the child being located within the fallopian tube. And so in order to save the mother's life, the fallopian tube is then cut out and removed. Why would this be an acceptable treatment? Well, because under the principle of double effect, if we run through the steps, we can clearly see that there is no direct attack on the child. It is, as we say, for the first principle, the action taken is morally neutral or good. Let's presuppose that a child was not inside of the fallopian tube, but there was something there that was wrong within the fallopian tube. Everybody would universally agree that cutting that affected part of the fallopian tube out, let's say a tumor was there, and removing it would be a good thing to do in order to save the mother's life, because removing sickness or disease is a good thing if possible. And so the action itself there checks out. 2, the bad effect, which is the child, we foresee that the child may be lost in this treatment, cannot be the means by which the good effect is achieved, so which is saving the life of the mother. Well, the direct attack on the child, there is no direct attack on the child. And so that is not the means by which the mother's life is saved. The means is actually removing the affected fallopian tube. 3, the good effect must be intended, which is saving the life of the mother. It is in this action. While the bad effect, which is the unintended but foreseen death of the child, is not willed as a part of this action. If it is willed, then that would make the action wrong, and it must be avoided if possible. In this case, it is not possible yet to keep that child, living outside of after it is removed within the fallopian tube. And so the fallopian tube itself, that's the object of the act there, to remove the fallopian tube. And so lastly, the good effect, which is saving the life of the mother, must be at least equal to the bad effect. And so we see an unintended, indirect effect, which is the child, unfortunately passing away, is proportionate to the saving of the life of the mother. And so in this case, the salpingectomy does check out according to the principle of double effect. Second, a salpingostomy. A salpingostomy has for its end the direct movement of the child. And so in this case, it is always wrong. Essentially, the child is directly attacked in order to save the mother's life. This is when an incision is made in the fallopian tube and the child is then removed, and then the fallopian tube is sewn back up. The reason why somebody may do this is to preserve fertility on that side. Now, we would say that in this case, because one, the action taken on the child is itself a direct action on the child, then we can say that direct action taken against innocent children, in which case the child is moved and then dies, and usually throughout the course of the movement is crushed because it's so small and fragile. And so this action itself is what kills the child and then saves the life of the mother. And so we can see here that the object of this act is actually morally evil. It's wrong to crush children. It's wrong to move them into environments that they can't live directly. And so somebody may pursue this to save their fertility, and they may argue, well, isn't it a good thing? Aren't you pro-life? You want children to be born. Isn't it a good thing to have as much fertility as you can? And we would say, yeah, fertility is a good thing. It is a blessing, but it is not a higher good than a human life. And so we cannot murder a child in order to preserve fertility, because fertility is then made the end and the child is reduced to a means to the end of fertility. And so this is sort of like a human sacrifice to fertility. We can actually see that this has happened in pagan societies where they would sacrifice children to like fertility gods, lowercase g gods, which we know according to Paul are demons, but we even know that that had happened, and we look at that and we go, that's abhorrent, that's horrible, you know? And so that's the salpingostomy there. Lastly, methotrexate is a really common drug. It is still seemingly debated, but is highly morally questionable at the minimum, in which case this means that it's a morally unsafe conclusion, a morally unsafe action to take. I am of the opinion that methotrexate constitutes a direct action against the child. Now, what is this? It's essentially a medicine per se that stops the growth of the trophoblast, which is around the child, and so then the child essentially does not get the nutrients it needs and then passes away. And so I would say that this is a direct action taken against the child, because the trophoblast being stopping the trophoblast from growing essentially, is a form of attack on the child. Now, some people will say the trophoblast is not a part of the child at this point, and so they would say that it is somehow indirect, but I really don't see any way around the fact that this is ordered towards the direct interference of the child's ability to grow. That is the object of the act taken here in order to preserve the life of the mother. And so I would say that it's wrong. Now, I will be honest, there are Catholic ethicists that may take a differing position, and I disagree with them. Okay, let's go ahead and then jump into abdominal ectopic pregnancy. Now, this is like a super rare form of ectopic pregnancy, and it becomes one of the most hard cases, you could say. It becomes one of the most morally complex cases. Now, I really want to unpack it in a simple way to actually show that it is not that morally complex. Rather, it's just emotionally charged. And so let's go ahead and take a look. An abdominal ectopic pregnancy is when the child is growing inside of the abdomen. And here we can observe that there's only two options in the case of an abdominal ectopic pregnancy. Because in the case of fallopian ectopic pregnancy, there is do nothing, there is take action to save the life of the mother. That does not constitute a direct attack on the child. And then third, there is obviously the direct attack on the child to preserve the mother's life, which we condemn. In the case of the abdominal ectopic pregnancy, there are only two options, which is to do nothing. Usually this is called expectant management. So it would be like if something bad does happen, we start treating that bleeding or something like that, but we do not attack the child. And so you would really do nothing there. You would just monitor the situation. And two, the other option would be take a direct attack against the child in order to save the life of the mother. And in this case, you find many people who are like, well, this is, I'm pro-life, but in this case, this is such a hard case that in this case, it would be acceptable to directly attack the child to save one life rather than have both lives die. Now, obviously, we can see how that really is reduced to a utilitarian mindset, but let's really jump into the morality of this situation. So let's presuppose that, as I've explained in this case, let's presuppose that this is a really dangerous situation, which it is. Some children have actually survived in an abdominal ectopic pregnancy and been born, from my understanding. So that doesn't really affect the substance of what I'm about to say, though. It just is a fun fact. In the case of in this case, the case of an abdominal ectopic pregnancy, the mother has a high likelihood of dying along with the baby. And so many people conclude it would be better to save one life than no lives. And so unfortunately, we have to kill the child in this situation in order to save the mother's life. But I would like to clarify, remember, intention, which is to save the mother's life, cannot change what the action really is. If the action is intrinsically morally evil, the intention does not change that action at all. And so the action would still be murder. For example, imagine that you are trapped in a room with a Nazi a Nazi traps you in a room with a 3-year-old. So a Nazi traps you in a room with a 3-year-old and says, if you don't kill this 3-year-old, I'm going to come in and kill both of you. Now, we would all sort of immediately realize that don't kill the 3-year-old. It's better to not kill the 3-year-old and let somebody else do that to both of you and kill both of you, because then you don't become a murderer. Because in the case that you preserve your own life, you have to kill a 3-year-old child, an innocent 3-year-old child. Now, we look at this situation and it becomes rather clear because we recognize that there is actually a higher good at play than preserving your own life, which is to not become a murderer. It's better to keep yourself uncorrupted by murder than it is to preserve your own life, because we recognize that there is a higher good at play, which is to keep yourself spotless and clean from these kinds of wicked actions. And so in this case, this is a direct parallel to the situation of the abdominal ectopic pregnancy. There is a threat to the mother's life, and the mother can either do nothing and hopefully the child would live. It is rare though, and do nothing and maybe they both pass, but the mother dies not having murdered her own child. instead of murdering her own child in order to preserve her own life. And so now, that being said, you might say, okay, I'm tracking with you, but I've heard people bring up, well, in this case, it's not really murder because it's actually an action of self-defense. In which case, I can see where you're coming from, but let's go ahead and analyze this situation further. Now, some people will say the child is acting as a sort of an unknowing aggressor against the mother, and therefore the mother, in order to preserve her own life, can defend herself from this aggressor to stop a threat. If we further examine the state of the child here, we can understand that the principle of self-defense does not fit here. The criteria do not fit. Why? Well, because the child is not found to be an aggressor at all. The child is actually literally incapable of aggression. Aggression is a willed action, first off. The child cannot will an action at this point. And secondly, the child is actually completely innocent. The force that is coming upon the mother is not an actual evil, rather it's a flaw in nature. So let's go ahead and look. So one, that child cannot choose aggression, nor is it capable of being held morally liable for aggression. The child is totally innocent and therefore cannot use force against the mother. Secondly, some may say the child is aggressing by existing in the wrong place, thereby causing her harm. But again, after further examination, we see that the child is indeed innocent. We would not say that a Down syndrome person having some sort of genetic defect is therefore evil because they have that genetic defect. No, not at all. We recognize that this would be a flaw in nature, not an evil action. Okay? So we would distinguish between somebody with Down syndrome. We wouldn't say they're just evil because they have Down syndrome. Similarly, the child in this case, what's happened to the child, where the child exists within the body of the mother, is indeed a flaw of nature, but it is not a moral evil. And so it would be different than, say, a 3-year-old who doesn't know what they're doing and picks up a knife and is about to stab another child. We would say, yes, intervene there, stop that child from stabbing the other child. And why would we say that it would be fine to intervene there, even with like a blow to the child, for example? We would say it's morally licit there because even though the child is not, say, willing the action, does not intend the action, does not understand that, the object of the action itself, is actually an ontological evil. It is an evil that is existing. It is an evil thing that a child would be stabbed by a knife, but the child may not know what they're doing. And so in that case, you could intervene, but that's not a flaw in nature. That's an actual action that is happening. In the case of the child existing in the wrong place is just an unfortunate flaw in nature. And so it's not justifiable to take action of self-defense against somebody who's not an aggressor and somebody who's not even committing an evil action, because the child is committing no action at all, really. It's just existing in the wrong place, and it didn't choose that. It's just the course of nature, a flaw in nature. And so now that we have run through that, the case of the abdominal ectopic pregnancy, we can understand that within the course or the context of the two actions there, which is do nothing and just expectant management versus directly attacking the child and killing the child to save the life of the mother, we understand that that one's off the table because murder is always wrong. Murdering innocent human beings is always wrong. And that leaves us with, the one course of action, which is to do expectant management, which is to not intervene, not to kill that child. We do not kill that child. And some people may actually then say, well, then since you know that the mother may die from this, you're allowing a threat to happen, and therefore you're responsible for this action. In which case, that's just first off, either you're confused or you're intentionally being dishonest, because There is no direct action being willed there. And similarly, in the case of the Nazi, we would not say that the person who chooses not to kill a 3-year-old is somehow morally liable for another evil person perpetrating murder against the two of them. We would say that the Nazi is held liable for that. Of course. And so, similarly, in this situation, the same reasoning applies. And so, we're not responsible for killing anyone. That person in that case should be commended for not killing an innocent person. Remember, there are higher goods, which is, even as Christians, we would say, there's a higher good, which is the state of your immortal soul. That's actually a higher good than your own life living. And this is, yes, it is, I will admit, it's a hard thing for our society to understand, but we are Christians. We do not betray the truth. We do not betray love. We do not betray morality. We do not perpetrate human sacrifice. And yes, our culture may look at us and say, wow, that seems odd. But we know where we are found. We know where our identity is, and it's in Jesus Christ, who is King of the universe. And so I want to just give you an encouragement, which is, yes, I know it can be difficult. But whenever I have this conversation, I always say, I want to save the life of the mother. We should do everything we can, but the one thing that's off the table is intentionally murdering somebody in order to make that thing a reality. And so most people can track with that in principle. And we have to look through each situation and come to those conclusions and be honest. And we have to hold to our convictions as pro-lifers, because if we don't, if we give up part of the syllogism, which is it is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, abortion kills an innocent human being, therefore abortion is wrong. If we sacrifice one of those premises, we give up our whole position. If we say that it is not always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, right? For example, in the case of the life of the mother, if that's something that we say, it's a false admission. We know it doesn't track with reality. We know it is always wrong to kill an innocent human being. And so in that way, we need to hold fast to the truth. We need to hold fast to our pro-life position. We do not want to let ourselves slip into being pro-abortion just in a very, very small set of circumstances. Because if you are against abortion except in a certain slim set of circumstances, what you are is really just pro-abortion for a very small set of circumstances. All right, I hope this video has helped you. Please like, subscribe to get more content like this. I plan on putting out more materials and teachings. And so thank you so much for watching, and God bless.